Well, hello, friends. I'm very happy to be joining you here in this celebration of the 150th year of the Theosophical Society's founding. Most of the world is thought of as Foundation Day. Here in the U.S., we tend to think of it as Founders Day. Either way, it's a time in which we pay special attention to the beginnings, to the roots, to what it is that supports and underlies this movement, of which the Theosophical Society is a major part. Probably, if we're going to think about the foundational ideas behind the TS, the three objects is what I would like to focus on today, the evolution specifically of the objects. Because we tend to think of them as three objects, but it took 20 plus years to get to the point where we have those objects with which we are so familiar. Most of us as members, we are acquainted with those objects. Perhaps we can say them at least approximately by heart. First object, to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, caste, creed, sex, or color. The second one is to encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science. And the third being to investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. So those are the ones that we have become familiar with, but they came into being over time. Before we talk a little bit about the objects, their beginnings, and the route they took to get to their present form, just a short distinction that we probably should keep in our minds. Most of us, it's probably something that is we understand, but good to make it explicit. And the distinction is between three things. On the one hand, we have theosophy. The second thing is the Theosophical Society. The third thing is theosophists, members of this Theosophical Society. So theosophy is what we know as the ageless or the divine wisdom. It is the body of truths that have been tested and verified over generations of seers, as spoken by H.P. Blavatsky. So there is this underlying wisdom that is theosophy. The Theosophical Society is an organization, and it's an organization that came into being with a specific purpose. That purpose being to make it known that such a thing as theosophy exists. Those are the words, again, of HPB in the key to Theosophy. So it's an organization. And then we have you and me, the members of the Theosophical Society. Now, simple fact is this, that theosophy, the ageless wisdom, exists regardless of whether there is a society that recognizes it, regardless of whether there are members for whom this ageless wisdom has some sort of importance. With or without any of that, the ageless wisdom abides. It exists. It is. But in our time, we have been fortunate in that this restatement in contemporary terms of the ageless wisdom has been something that we have been able to be exposed to. As members, it's something where we have found perhaps that within the Theosophical Society, it is a place where these ideas, where the knowledge related to this ultimate experience of truth can be found. It's a place where we perhaps feel that we can be comfortable in the exploration of it, and so it becomes something that is very important to us. And so the founding of this and the theosophical movement that has come into being with it is something that has had great meaning for many of us. So the objects. If we talk about the objects, in many ways, what the objects do is define the nature of this society that has come into being to point toward truth, toward wisdom. In many ways, it's a meeting place, much like a temple, much like a sacred circle. It's a space that has been set aside for a very specific activity, an activity of consciousness. In many ways, the objects delineate a location, as much like a deed or a land deed, where it describes, it delineates the location on the map where a specific place, a place where there are specific activities or residents, where it can be found. That's the purpose of land deeds. In the case of the Theosophical Society, what we have is a space that is indicated, but it's on the map of human consciousness, we could say. And these objects speak to where, in fact, this might be found. And so in the case of our three objects, that space in which unity, spoken of as brotherhood, is one of the things that is endeavored to be created, to be recognized. That's part of the space where there is an embrace of elevated thought along the lines of religion, of philosophy, of science. That's also a defining feature of this space that is the Theosophical Society. And also where there is an awareness of hidden potentials, of possibilities within us and within that greater body within which we all exist, which we describe as humanity. Hidden potentials that unfold over time and with intelligent effort and reveal themselves. Oftentimes they're things that are completely unseen. The objects of the Theosophical Society, as we know them now, are something that evolved. They didn't just spring into being in 1875 with the foundation of the Theosophical Society. In fact, the objects went through a period, went through an evolution. So what they were, it began first as one stated object, not three. So there was one object. Then next, it was developed into 6 objects. Then it was developed into 7 objects. We Theosophists like 7s. And then it was reduced, it was made more concise, went to 4, and then finally it came to 3. During the time that HPB was alive, all of this activity was taking place. So really by the time, during her lifetime, it had gone through these cycles to actually reach the point where there were 3 objects very much alike the ones as we know them. A word or two here and there has been changed since. In many ways, the evolution of these objects they kind of track the evolution of the Theosophical Society itself. When we look at the objects at the Theosophical Society's beginnings, we see objects that were developed in a Western world. The Theosophical Society was founded in New York City. And it was founded and it attracted people of that place who were culturally familiar with the Western world. It was HPB who really was someone who was the main attractor, in the sense that she was a person who was so deeply versed in the expressions of the ageless wisdom that were found around the world. She had traveled traveled globally, and all of her travel was in search of the depths of what was largely described as occult wisdom, but knowledge of unseen things related to the highest nature of the human being and of the cosmos. So when she appeared in New York and she and Olcott connected, she was a person who was capable of producing phenomena, psychic phenomena, you could say, where she could make objects appear, she could make things move, she could do many, many things that were phenomenal. And people were attracted to that. It was something that caught the attention, and then she was able to give deeper explanations related to how these phenomena actually worked. So there was this fascination in the West with phenomena, with the unseen worlds. Spiritualism was a huge component of that time, where you had people communicating with those who had passed on, and remarkable phenomena occurring related to that, where people were speaking, where levitations were taking place. Remarkable things, some of which attracted people who were falsely producing these things, but in the whole it was undeniable that these things were actually occurring. So there was this attraction to the unseen. Also, at the time of the Theosophical Society's founding, it was just 10 years after the largest loss of life in war for the United States of America, the Civil War, where 600, 700,000 people had died, had passed on to the other side. So there was this deep longing to communicate with. And so when these phenomena started appearing, it attracted great attention. But additionally, what HPB was able to add to this was this exotic Eastern point of view that was at that point really unknown in the Western world. When you think about it, the first attempt at a Theosophical Society with Olcott was to form what he described as a miracle club. So basically it was a group that was going to explore various sort of supernatural, miraculous things. That one did not materialize. So it began as a Western attraction, a Western fascination with Eastern or Oriental wisdom, as it was called, with a attraction to phenomena that were inexplicable by the growing body of science that was taking root in the world. So this was something that attracted many people. And so for the first few years of the Theosophical Society, that was its focus. And the objects related to that period expressed that. In a minute, I will just go over and we can just go through the evolution of those objects, just to have the language in our minds. From New York, the society in 1878, the end of 1878, and actually beginning in 1879, began a phase of growth in India when the founders, HPB and Olcott, got on a ship leaving from New York, stopped in London, and then came on to India. And when they reached India, the character of the work of the TS changed dramatically. There was the fact that within India, they found themselves in a place where for millennia, there was a deep spiritual tradition, well researched, but that it was a tradition that was really under attack. India at the time that they came there was a colonial India. It was under the British Raj. And it was something where old values and old understandings were being diminished. They were regarded as, from a Christian point of view, as heathen, and from a British point of view, one of the requirements of colonial occupation of a society is that it has to be deemed inferior. So the superior ones, their point of view, which is to say the British point of view related to education, related to religion, was thought to be dominant, and the other ones were minimized. So there were these forces that were involved in a fragmentation of the ancient society and understandings that were in India. And this is where HPB and Alcott found themselves. And they found themselves really anti these forces of limitation, because they could see in the religious understanding, in the philosophical understanding of India, deep truths and deep approaches to actually the experience of these things that had been tested over countless generations. So when they set up their living and their work there, the work of the Theosophical Society became something very different from what it had been when it was founded in New York. Still, it was focused on truth. Still, it was focused on ageless expressions that appear in all of the religions of the world. But in India, it became something where the focus was really very keenly on recognizing and emphasizing the priceless truths that were within this Indian civilization and religion that were being destroyed, that were the limitations that were being enforced on it through the educational process that was being imprinted and through the religious disdain for the religions and the practices that were there. So they took on this role, and it became something that the TS was exceedingly successful in focusing attention on the value of ancient practices, of ancient understandings, in the face of material science, which in many cases added important observations, but also diminished by claiming for itself all knowledge, diminished what was the inheritance from the ages. So with the Indian experience is when the Theosophical Society really began to grow. And from India is where it actually spread around the world and throughout India as well. So that was something that was, when we see the objects as they take shape during this phase, is when we start to understand that the differences in the evolutionary periods of this early life of the Theosophical Society. To reach its final form, which is to say the three objects shared at the beginning, was something where beyond the Western world, beyond the world of India, the Theosophical Society acknowledges that it is here for humanity as a whole, a global embrace that incorporated universal brotherhood, that spiritually based, culturally, socially, politically, yes, but the basis for it is in the spiritual unity of human beings and of humanity. And then this idea of the oneness that every religion, every philosophy, every science, wherever we find it in the world, is something that in its essence points toward one shared truth. Different avenues of exploring it, but there is one commonly held truth that at their deepest levels they all point toward. And then the commonality of latent potentials shared by all of us. And so these were this was the process, the phases through which this evolution took place. And again, it took place between 1875, with the founding of the TS, and culminated like 1896, I believe. It's like 21 years later, the last word, the last T was crossed, the last I was dotted in the form of the three objects as we have them now. It has evolved to this present state. So perhaps, just for historical purposes, and so that we can have a sense of the movement of these objects, I'll just share what they have been and at each point. Okay, so forgive me as I read this to you. So when the Theosophical Society was founded in 1875, there was just one object that was expressed. That object was the objects of the Theosophical Society are to collect and diffuse a knowledge of the laws which govern the universe. That was it. In 1875, to collect a knowledge and diffuse that knowledge of the laws which govern the universe. Very broad, not specific, but related to many things that would perhaps be deemed unseen. One of the things that we find from the point of view of the objects as we know them now is that in that initial statement of objects, that no mention of universal brotherhood or unity is expressed. So it was yet to come. 1878, again, a lot of these things took place in terms of meetings of General Council and things like that. So by 1878, it had evolved into 6 objects. They weren't numbered, but there were 6 objects. And it was to personally exemplify the highest morality and religious aspiration, to oppose the materialism of science and every form of dogmatic theology, especially the Christian, which the chiefs of the society regard as particularly pernicious. There are a lot of opinions and attack. To make known among Western nations the long-suppressed facts about Oriental religious philosophies, their ethics, chronology, esotericism, symbolism. So again, this was still a Western-based organization, and so it was to make known among Western nations. It was the study of the other, deemed Oriental or Eastern. And then to counteract, as far as possible, the efforts of missionaries to delude the so-called heathen and pagans as to the real origin and dogmas of Christianity and the practical effects of the latter upon public and private character in so-called civilized countries. So very language heavy, but setting up a clear pattern of who's for us and who's against us. And basically in these early days, the Christianity was deemed as a force opposing this effort to reach deeply into the wisdom traditions of other nations. And that's expressed in these, what were then the objects of the Theosophical Society. Very different from what we have now. Then to disseminate a knowledge of the sublime teachings of that pure esoteric system of the archaic period, which are mirrored in the oldest Vedas, in the philosophy of Gautama Buddha, Zoroaster, and Confucius. So again, us and them. The West making known the deep wisdom of the Vedas, the philosophy of the Buddha, Zoroaster, Confucius. And again, in the Western world, these are things that were unknown. Obviously, there were some scholars, some people to whom they had devoted their study to that. But as far as the people or the culture, it was uninfluenced by these things in the 1800s. And finally, here it comes. Finally and chiefly, to aid in the institution of a brotherhood of humanity. This is the first time this comes up. Wherein all good and pure men of every race shall recognize each other as the equal effects upon this planet of one uncreate, universal, infinite, and everlasting cause. So it's at this point that really what had been emphasized in the Mahatma letters particularly, but these letters were not available yet, they hadn't started to be written. But the emphasis to HPB and others, universal brotherhood is the way that it's expressed, but the unity of humanity becomes expressed here. And that was 1878. It's in 1878 that the founders started their journey at the end of that year toward India. At that time, just to get from London to Bombay, now Mumbai, was a 9-week trip. And that was only recent within the 10 years. They had developed the Suez Canal. And because of the Suez Canal, it was no longer 5 months. It was instead just 9 weeks. They didn't have to circle the Horn of Africa. So that's 1878. General Council, at this point, the Theosophical Society in 1881 was in India. They had not yet found and purchased the Adyar headquarters, but in 1881, this again was at a time where they met at the Maharaja, one of the Maharaja's homes, and the General Council again revamped the rules, this time to 7. So from 1 to 6, and now in 1881, we have 7 rules, which are described by them as plans. 7 objects were the plans. So that was expressed in this way. In Benares, they were at the palace of the Maharaja. So 1 was to keep alive the spiritual intuitions in man. The second one was to oppose and counteract, after due investigation and proof of its irrational nature, bigotry in every form, whether as an intolerant religious sectarianism or a belief in miracles or anything supernatural. So again, the view had changed from the focus on phenomena and the supernatural that was so evident in the beginnings of the Theosophical Society. To promote a feeling of brotherhood among nations, this is the third one, and assist in the international exchange of useful arts and products. I find this one rather strange. By advice, information, and cooperation with all worthy individuals and associations, provided, however, that no benefit or percentage shall be taken by the society for its corporate services. So this is more cultural. The idea that there can be an exchange across West and East of useful arts and products, and that the Theosophical Society can play a role in that, but not for money. So the next one is the fourth, to seek to obtain knowledge of all the laws of nature, which is a very expansive seeking, and aid in diffusing it, thus to encourage the study of those laws least understood by modern people, and so termed the occult sciences. Popular superstition and folklore, however fantastical, when sifted, may lead to the discovery of long-lost but important secrets of nature, The Society therefore aims to pursue this line of inquiry in the hope to widen the field of scientific and philosophical observation. So that's a noble idea, to look into popular superstition and folklore and to bring out the pearls. A lot of that work became the work that people such as Joseph Campbell and others undertook in later years. And then the fifth is to gather for the Society's library and put into written form correct information upon the various ancient philosophies, traditions, legends, and as the Council shall decide it permissible, disseminate the same in such practicable ways as the translation and publication of original works of value and extracts from commentaries upon the same, or the oral instructions of persons learned in their respective departments. So at this time, the Society didn't have a library. Basically, the library was wherever HPB and Alcott found themselves, but they had visions of establishing a library and to contribute to it from the various ancient philosophies. Sixth one is to promote in every practicable way, in countries where needed, the spread of non-sectarian Western education. So again, the idea that the Western, when non-sectarian, a Western approach to education, which also was something that was being strongly influenced by a material science that was crowding out the role of religion and philosophy. So the idea that in some way this was something that was worthy of the Theosophical's efforts to promote was part of this phase of the evolution of the Society as expressed in its objects. And then finally, and chiefly, to encourage and assist individual fellows in self-improvement, intellectual, moral, and spiritual. But no fellow shall put to his selfish use any knowledge communicated to him by any member of the first section. Violation of this rule being punished by expulsion, and before any such knowledge can be imparted, the person shall bind himself by a solemn oath not to use it to selfish purposes, nor to reveal it, except with the permission of the teacher. So this one brings an idea into being that was in force at that time. The idea that there were three different levels within the Theosophical Society, three sections. The first section being explicitly initiates, or the masters. So they were the underlying source of this movement. And so the way it was being expressed is that anybody who came in contact with knowledge from this first section, from the masters, was bound to not reveal it, and was bound not to use it for selfish purposes. And again, the numbers of people historically within the TS who were in direct communication with the masters are few, very few. And the idea being that this society in the minds of the people of this time was one where they were putting themselves in a condition to be communicated with, was what these rules were preparing for so that it would not be misused or selfishly used or even revealed. The second section within this envisioning of three sections of the TS, first was initiates and the Mahatmas. Second would have been those actual members of the Theosophical Society who had demonstrated through a life of practice, of commitment, their status. Now, how you would determine that would be something that was, it was in early stages. The third was just members who were spoken of as probationers. Basically people who were on the probationary path toward these higher levels of understanding. And this was incorporated into the rules of this time. So, I mean, it gives a glimpse into where the TS was in 1879. 1879. In 1881, the objects of the Theosophical Society reduced dramatically from the 1 to the 6 to the 7. It became 4. And this is in 1881, just 2 years after the previous list of 7 objects had been released. So again, the General Council, meeting in 1881, changed the rules of the society. And this time they condensed these 7 plans into these 4 objects. Many ways very similar to the 3 that we have now. So those 4 objects became this. And it will start to sound familiar at this point. The first, to form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity, the obvious philanthropic value of which must be beyond dispute, while the esoteric significance of a union formed on that plan is conceived by the founders for reasons derived from a study of Oriental philosophy to be of great importance. Second, to study Aryan literature, religion, and science, which the founders believed to contain certain valuable truths and philosophical views, of which the Western world knows nothing. Third, to vindicate the importance of this inquiry and correct misrepresentations with which it has been clouded. And then the fourth, and again this is familiar, to explore the hidden mysteries of nature and the latent powers of man, on which the founders believe that Oriental philosophy is in a position to throw light. 1886. At this time, the Theosophical Society has had its international headquarters in Adyar for more than 4 years. 1886, a lot of the work that Alcott had done with Buddhism in what was then Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, had been accomplished. Great strides had been taken within India in terms of the restoration of its ancient Sanatana Dharma, the ageless wisdom, and the respect for such. So that was something where in 1886, again, there was a meeting, and again, this time the objects were condensed and became much more concise, much more free from a lot of the flowing language that had accompanied the previous objects. And these ones end up being very similar, even more similar to the ones that we have now. So, to form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, or color. 2, to promote the study of Aryan and other Eastern literatures, religions, and sciences. 3, a third object pursued by a portion of the members of the society is to investigate unexplained laws of nature and the psychical powers of man. So again, met again in 1890, and these objects were becoming ever more and more concise, ever more and more not specific to the West, neither specific to India, but global. Global in their outlook and global in their language. So 1890, the first and the second objects were expanded, and the third was shortened. So in 1890, you have to form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. So sex and caste were added to that first object. To promote the study of Aryan and other Eastern literatures, religions, philosophies, and science, and to demonstrate their importance to humanity. So philosophies were added to that one, and the demonstration of their importance. And then the third, to investigate unexplained laws of nature and the psychic powers latent in man. And then in 1894, another slight amendment. And then in 1896, there was a last modification made. And that was something that brought it into the form with which we are all familiar now. The first object became to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood. The idea being that this work of forming centers of activity in the human family is going on within the Theosophical movement and elsewhere. But it is a nucleus we are focused on forming of the one universal brotherhood, the unity of humanity. And so that's something of the evolution of these objects from Western specific or Western culturally biased to a focus from a perspective embedded deep within the Indian experience in colonial times to a global embrace of the universal. So in all of this, it has characterized an unfoldment of this theosophical movement as it's expressed through the Adyar branch of the theosophical movement. And it's something that has been, has evolved, and has that evolution stopped? Have we come to a final point? I think in large measure because these things were virtually finalized during the time of HPB and approved by her. It's kind of been sanctioned by longevity, by the fact that we have embraced them for so long. It's not to say that there aren't suggestions for ways in which these can be modified. I mean, some people would ask, why is it that the focus is on gender-specific language? So, why is it that it is a universal brotherhood rather than something like a universal kinship? Would someone be as attracted to the Theosophical Society if it was the universal sisterhood of humanity? These are ideas that have been expressed as far as use of language, and the idea that in some ways, while it points a direction, it also is limiting, as language must be. Some people would say that in addition to the religion, philosophy, science, why not the arts? Why isn't that something that is included as, for many people, their deepest experience of truth, of wisdom, has come through music, through dance, through poetry. Even the scriptures of the world depend on poetic language in order to express themselves. So why not the arts? Why not added specificity in terms of we talk about race, creed, caste, sex, color. Race in today's world of science is biologically, it's not a meaningful idea. Biologically, the idea of race is, it doesn't exist in biology. It's a culturally structured idea, so why not develop that in terms of the thinking of our time? These are ideas that come up. Gender is something that is different, related to, but different from the idea of binary idea of male, female. Why not something about gender? Why not something about ethnicity? The list goes on in terms of ways in which ideas for altering the expression of these objects. But underneath the idea of unity, the idea of avenues that point toward truth and the experience of truth, and the idea of powers latent within us, potentials that are lying in wait of our attention and our experience, is the point of the Theosophical Society and its movement. One of the things that does come up is that even though these objects are far-reaching, in many ways they did not and do not express a mission, a purpose. Although it probably would be subject for another talk about such things. 2019, the Theosophical Society, over a 2-year period, developed an idea of a mission statement. It's a powerful piece, really. It's 24 words, very compact. I tell people that I work with, if you can remember 2 phone numbers, you can remember the mission statement of the Theosophical Society. And it begins with the idea that the Theosophical Society exists to serve humanity. Those are the opening words. And I think with that, it puts its finger on the purpose of this movement, to serve humanity by cultivating an ever-deepening understanding and realization of the ageless wisdom, spiritual self-transformation, and the unity of all life. Again, subject for another talk. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to go over some of the ideas that have been in play during the course of the Theosophical Society's own unfoldment and the way it has been expressed in the objects. So once again, I thank you for participating in this recognition of 150 years of good work done and of the movement of consciousness that the Theosophical Society represents. Thank you.